amazing venue. God, I feel very privileged to be standing here talking to you in a venue like this. Pretty amazing. And as Kat showed me around, she reminded me of all the amazing people that have been in this building, so it's quite humbling to stand up here. I'm also conscious that every patient has a story to tell, and probably everybody in this room has a patient in their family. They may be a patient themselves, and they all have stories to tell, and each one of those is as important as the next one. Mine's no more special than anybody else's. But for the next few minutes, you get to either listen or fall asleep to me. So I'm very grateful to that. I think the reason I put this slide up, not because everybody likes Steve Jobs and everybody quotes Steve Jobs, is it kind of echoes what's just been said by our esteemed hosts, in that change really is something that's often talked about but often doesn't actually come through. And as a patient, someone that's been a patient for 35 years, I don't actually see a great deal of progress over that period of time. But I think that people like myself are crazy enough to think we can deliver some change. And I think the time is right for crazy people like us to think that we can disrupt healthcare enough to make a real difference. As you would have seen in many conferences and many tech conferences, a typical quote will go up about the fact that we're now really at the point that we can harness the computer, we can relieve the burden, AI is talked about, AR, virtual reality, everything's talked about on many occasions, and we're there. What you might be interested to know with this quote, that actually it was mentioned in 1984 by the then Secretary of State for Business, who said we were at the point to harness the computer. And other than the fact that the only way I can get my daughter down for dinner is to Snapchat her, I'm not quite sure what progress we've made, whether it be electronic records, whether it be communications with our healthcare professionals, or whether it be engagement with pharma. I struggle to think of the dramatic progress we might have made since 1984. But that said, let's just put technology aside for 1 minute. I've been a patient, as I said, for over 35 years. And I think fundamentally what we're talking about today is a change in relationship. Because healthcare for me is not about tools and mobile phones and people arguing and shouting with each other about can we do this or can we do that. Actually, healthcare is about a relationship. It's very simple. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the relationship with my healthcare professionals. And I think relationships are built on the following principles of mutual trust, mutual respect, and mutual empathy. It's a two-way thing. Often it's more than a two-way. And as a patient, it is absolutely important that I give as much empathy, respect, and trust to my healthcare professionals as I want back from them. I think that's quite relevant in a society today, where there's an awful lot of lack of trust and lack of respect and lack of empathy. I think we need to go back to the fundamental principles of this. And as a 16-year-old, I went to see a gastroenterologist in London. Like everybody's parents, they all know the best physicians in the world, and I got sent to one. Sadly, a gentleman who's no longer with us called Sir Anthony Dawson. He was the Queen's physician, and I think my parents just assumed if he could shove a scope up the backside of the Queen, he'd be good enough for me. But he said something that stayed with me forever. As I walked in, he cleared my parents out the room, and he said to me, "Here's the deal, Michael. I'll only treat you if you take as much responsibility for your care as I will. We're going to do it together as a team. I'm going to teach you what it's like to have your condition," which was Crohn's disease, "and I'm going to teach you the markers and the things that you need to know, and you're going to teach me what it's like to be you, and we'll do this together." And I think at the very heart of healthcare, that has stayed with me today, and I very much hope it's something you'll bear in mind as you work through the day today. A bit about me. Sadly, I think there are a few people in the audience who know a little bit of my history. That's a picture that my daughter takes great pride in. As I was lying in hospital for 9 months after my transplant, she proceeded to blow up every one of those gloves that were on the walls in the rooms and then shove them in different places around my bed, most of the time filled with ice cubes, and then run away and think it was funny. But as I said, I was diagnosed with Crohn's at the age of 12. It's an incurable inflammatory bowel disease, for those who don't know. I had my first surgery at the age of 14, and some 25 surgeries later, my intestine that started out at several meters ended up at 40 centimeters, and I had intestinal failure. And spent about 18 months at University College Hospital in London, where they tried to jumpstart my bowel and then told me you needed an intestinal transplant, but don't want to have one in the UK. They've only done 10, and sadly 5 haven't made it. I was on intravenous feeding for 22 hours a day, and I picked up my supplies and went off to New York, to Mount Sinai Hospital, because they offered me a suite of options. And those suite of options after 2 days were, you need a bowel transplant now, because if you wait another 12 months, you're going to need a liver, bowel, and possibly stomach. So those risks are even worse than they are today. They also asked for $500,000. I didn't know Mike then, so I couldn't have access to $500,000. Had I done, maybe. But as a throwaway line, as I'm leaving the room, he says, why aren't you in Oxford? There's this guy, Anil Vadia, he trained in Miami, and he's gone back to start the program in Oxford. So we went away, and I did, I guess, well, the Pew Institute says it's 86% of patients. I suspect it's going up. I turned to Google, busiest doctor in the world, to find out some information on him. And there wasn't anything. So we rocked up at the NHS in Oxford, just thinking we'd pay lip service to what was going on and Google Mike and find the $500,000. But actually, what he did then was very much what happened to me as a 16-year-old. There were 8 lever arch files on the side of the table and about 12 people in the room. I was going to be his first patient back. He didn't open a single record. He took the notebook on the top and he drew what my intestine looked like today. And next to it, he drew what it should look like. And then through a series of pictures, he drew, in my language, exactly why I needed to have this transplant today. And in about 3 minutes, we built that mutual empathy, trust, and respect. And I went on to become his first and the 11th intestinal transplant patient in the UK. The reason I put up that slide and the icons on the right, because if I wind the clock forward to 2018, all those tools on the right are how I interact with my healthcare, and equally, all of them are just as important as the other. Of course, the NHS keeps me alive and is the most amazing institution. My healthcare professionals are my second family. I'm on WhatsApp with them every single day. I have a line in my arm that I inject through twice a day. If there's an issue, I take a photo on my phone, I send it to them via WhatsApp, and we engage. If I want to know something that's going on in research, or I want to know something that's going on in the industry, I find a hashtag on Twitter and I get more education, because social media democratizes the conversation and allows us to engage in places we haven't previously engaged with. And then there are everyday tools like Skype and text messaging. When I finished or got discharged finally from my transplant, I'd been in hospital for 9 months. And my surgeon then said to me, we need to see you every week. You know, this is serious, Michael. You need to see you every week. And I'm like, but I've got to drive 90 minutes to see you every week for probably 5 minutes of your time. You'd be far better off operating on someone else than seeing me. Let's Skype. And he went, yeah, sure, no problem at all. So he set up his account, got a multidisciplinary team together, sat in the room. As he goes to send me to connect, they all walk out and go, you're not sharing data on Skype, are you? You're not talking to a patient on Skype. So he closed his laptop and he went home. And for 18 months, he'd Skyped me from his front room. It took 22 months before the Trust would initiate Skype clinics as an option for patients in transplant. 22 months, something that is simple that we use every single day. And then I'd say to him, just text me my blood results back. Do me a favor. I don't need to come in for them. Just text me. So he did. And then as he got a little bit braver and he saw that I was on social media and we were having a Twitter engagement, and I said, just do me a favor, quickly direct message me. For those that don't know, direct message is effectively a private message one-to-one. He tweeted the world my blood results by mistake. What happened then was that 4 surgeons from around the world tweeted back going, hang on a minute, with those results, check his potassium and check his magnesium. And we had this conversation around the world. That's the future of healthcare. And then when I went back into hospital and they were borderline, has he got rejection or hasn't he got rejection when they were analysing the biopsy? He sat on the end of my bed and he opened his laptop and he connected in with his friend in Miami. And Rodrigo in Miami wasn't sure, so they connected in another surgeon in Georgetown, Washington. And on the bed, there was the patient, the surgeon, and 2 others from around the world analysing my biopsy. That took bravery. That took bravery from him. And so one of my challenges today to all of you is very simply this. The future of healthcare is really in your hands. It's not in the hands of patients, because we're brave enough to take action every single minute of every single day. Are you guys brave enough to take the action we need to affect the change today? Because it's not good enough where we are today, and we need to make change. It's also not good enough to be in a room where we just shout about it, and we shout at each other, and we blame each other. Actually, the best conversations are when we bring together people of diverse opinions, diverse reasoning, and we find a solution together. But that starts with your bravery, not ours, because we're ready to engage. As an industry, pharma, I would argue, has been somewhat challenging at wanting to engage with patients. And as you can see from the slide there, and you can see from the next slide, patients are willing to engage and share their data pretty much anywhere at any time if it gives us a better outcome. It always fascinates me that when you sit in a lot of outpatient clinics and when you go on Facebook and you go on social media, patients are sharing more and more data there than often they do with their healthcare professionals. But somehow you guys in pharma go, we can't talk to you directly. We'll talk to a patient association, or we'll talk to something else. That's not acceptable in 2018, because patients are window cleaners, builders, plumbers, doctors, accountants, lawyers, you name it. We're human beings as well. And the thing is about people like me, we're complete and utter pain in the arses, I know that. But actually we want to engage in life and not in health. We want to consume our health in the way that we consume everyday life. So I would argue and ask you to be brave enough to engage with me and with patients in the room today so that we can affect change. And as you'll see, there's some really interesting statistics about where we lie in terms of digital engagement at the moment and what we do. And everybody's talking about who are going to be the largest healthcare companies in the world. For me, the largest healthcare and the best engaged healthcare companies in the world are going to be Apple, Google, and Amazon, because they have access to all my data. I interact with them every single day. When I get my medicines delivered to home, the only way I can guarantee to get them on time is to tweet the hell out of the company. Where are they? But if I want dog food, I can get it in 2 hours on Amazon Prime. We just need to think about how we change that model of care and how we deliver that model of care into the real world in 2018. And one of the ways I think we can do that is to change the culture. And you can only change the culture if guys like you and events like this are brave enough, which is what you've been, to invite myself and other speakers today to share our stories. Because it's stories that change culture and stories that are very important. And then you have to collaborate together. And as was mentioned in my introduction, I had the privilege of being the first patient in residence at Stanford for their Medicine X program. And we built a model of care together called Everyone Included. And that was very simple. You don't design, develop, or build any single solution in healthcare unless everybody that's affected by it is in the room from day one. And we took that model of care to Barack Obama's White House for a clinical trials workshop. And we started to work with their precision medicine initiative, which said no clinical trial will ever be developed without a patient. Not a patient representative without a patient. Because as healthcare is moving to an outcomes-based model, who knows what outcome is right for each one of you as an individual? Only I know what outcome is important to me. And that outcome will differ to the scientist, to the doctor, to the nurse, to the family member, to the caregiver, etc. So we have to be in the room together. And now Stanford are doing a few other things. They've got patients as part of their education system. And the next initiative that's going to come out of that is Patient School, where patients are educators in healthcare. It's not the holy grail. Trust me, as someone that's navigating the US and the UK health system, it has its just as many challenges as we do. But it's that situation of coming together and collaborating together that is really the message I would like to be able to deliver to you guys today. And it's with that context that really I have been part of this movement that's growing around the world called the Maker Movement. And it's about hacking your own health. And it's about patients from around the world who are basically trying to solve problems that the system either hasn't got round to doing so or takes a bit longer to do so. And patients like myself, we don't know what our outcomes are going to be. I live on a 50-50 survival rate. I got no intention of not being here for many decades. But the harsh reality of it is I don't know what's going to happen to me, so we have to start to hack our own health. In my case, it was after an intestinal transplant. As part of transplant, the thing that I remember waking up the most to was having a bag attached to my body. Most of you will probably know of a stoma bag. It's basically where part of your bowel is brought to the outside of your body and your bodily waste is collected in a bag. It's a collection vessel. It fills up and you empty it. Unfortunately, managing with stoma bags is a challenge because they leak, they spill, you don't know when output is coming. And not only that, often the doctors and nurses need to know how much is coming out and when it's coming out. So you get really sophisticated equipment called a plastic jug to empty your shit into and then measure it. And I'm going, this is interesting, there's got to be a different way. So while I was in hospital, I connected with about 20,000 patients around the world via social media and just went, what do you do? And how do you cope? And the overwhelming message was very simply, just get on with it. That is the life. And I'm like, nah, that's not good enough. Let's figure it out. And so thanks to the powers of eBay and YouTube, I hacked together this really rubbish sensor. But the principle of it, the strip that you see at the bottom is a flex sensor. It came out of a Nintendo Wii glove. Because when you put your hand in this computer game glove and you bend your fingers, it sends a signal. So the principle for me was very simple. If I put it on my bag, as my bag changed shape, I could send a signal somewhere. And then a BlackBerry battery. Yeah, they did exist back then, BlackBerry batteries. And a thing. And I would sellotape it to the outside of my bag and go, this is really cool. My bag beeps as it's filling. And my doctors said to me, doesn't help me. Still need to know how much shit is coming out your body and when. Go figure out an algorithm and see if you can work it out. And we did. And we figured out an algorithm and we could start to automate volume capture from the bag. And that was really the genesis of 11 Health. And now, as my 19-year-old tells me every single day, Dad, all you do is just measure shit. But, and he takes great delight in it. Forgive my language, sorry. We're in a very posh building. Whoops, I won't get invited back, I know. But the reality of it, for me, what intrigued me was if you could measure what comes out the body, you could determine what to put in the body. And in an age where we're really worried about what we put in our body, and we look at microbiomes, and we look at bacteria issues, actually, a bag is a 24-hour-a-day wearable. You can't take it off. So we built a company that really analyzes what comes out the body. We turn dumb bags smart. And we put a bunch of sensors in the bag, and we create a lab on a chip, and then we deliver all of that data. And from there, we have a solution that moves on from there. But what intrigued me as we started to look at these, and 11 Health was built on that everyone included model. There's nothing we do, no piece of code that changes, no app screen, no product that goes out there unless it's involved a patient, in our case, a nurse, a physician, unfortunately in the States, health insurance, and the technologists all come together and deliver change. And what we noticed by complete fluke is if you start putting temperature sensors on the body, it really changes as activity happens. And now we can measure body temperature as output comes out the body, and we can start to detect infection markers, and we can start to detect things that are going on around the wound. So it's quite interesting how a hack from a hospital bed can turn into something that I think is quite cool, but my kids think is really rubbish. But as we started to scale the business and I started to do a little more delving, I really started to understand this world of personalized medicine and what was important to me and how it differed from somebody else's. And we kind of live in a world of integrated platforms now and omics, everything's an omic and whatever. But for me, what were the barriers to scaling the innovation? Well, it was very simple, regulatory and who was going to pay. Ultimately, that's what it boiled down to. And for me, we're just a class one. We're a very low regulatory burden. And I phoned the FDA up in America and I said, I need something called a 510K for Class 1 regulatory approval. And they were really good. They said, speak to lawyers and consultants and then come back to us. And I said, I don't have any money. Can you help me? And they went, oh, no one normally asks us those questions. Yeah, we'll help you. And 9 months later, we got regulatory approval. Just a comparative story. I had looked at stoma care in the UK, and pretty much everything on stoma care is prescribed, including, did you know, you can have from your bag a pipe attached and allow your effluent to drain into your drainage in your house and your sewers in the house. And the NHS will cover it. So I just assumed it would cover my product. And I went online and there was a 2-page Word document that I filled in to get to the drug tariff. And I sent it off. And 4 months later, I got a reply that said, where's your clinical evaluation? And I said, didn't ask for it on the form. I just filled in the form. So we did a clinical evaluation and we sent it back. And 4 months later, we heard again, where's your health economic model? I'm like, but you didn't ask for it. Why didn't you ask for it? So we did a health economic model that we got 100 patients and we did all of that. And we delivered about a 33% cost reduction using technology. And then, so we were about 18 months in at this point, at which point they said, well, no, technology doesn't fit on the drug tariff. There's going to be an innovation and technology tariff coming. So wait for that. I'm like, but we've just done this work for 18 months. And then the tariff comes out, and the first 2 things on it are episiotomy scissors and a walk-in clinic. Now, it's fine if you're a big company and you can invest that time and effort, but if you're an SME, and particularly if you're an SME built by patients, you haven't got that time to wait. And at the same time as we're going through this, we go and start to raise some money. Hey, we have regulatory approval, we have a payment model in the US, let's raise some money. I went to 43 companies in the UK. The single biggest thing that they came back to me with was, you're a patient, you're a high-risk patient, you'll be dead before the product comes out. You're not backable. And I Googled who was the #1 venture capitalist in the world. And it came up actually with a Brit in America called Sir Mike Moritz, of a company called Sequoia Capital. He actually wrote the first checkout for Google, sat on their board for 18, 20 years, and PayPal, Dropbox, Apple, all of that nonsense. And I said, can you help me? I've never raised money before. I don't know how to do it. This is my story. And he said, yeah. And 3.5 months later, he invested in the company. And it's amazing how many, all those people that said no suddenly say yes when you have a #1 venture capitalist on your books. But hey, maybe he thought I'd live a little bit long enough to get a product out. But really, my story is no different to so many. And going back to the issues at hand, and before I get kicked off the stage, we'll see the 3-minute warning or the 1-minute warning. It interests me. You know, Google fixed search. They're now talking about mapping the world. And as we do that and we go back to data, often that's the holy grail. We get hit by a Daily Mail headline about we can't share data and we've got to worry about data. And we've got to worry about what we're doing. There isn't anything, any of my data that I wouldn't share anywhere if it wasn't going to improve the quality of my life or give my family an opportunity for me to be part of it for a longer period of time. So as we talk about breaking down rules and breaking things, and we talk about thinking about the impossible, data sharing has to be front and center of every conversation. It's utter rubbish that in 2018, pharmaceutical industry says it can't talk to a patient. It's just ridiculous when we can talk to everybody every minute of the day on devices that are probably all in your pockets, or you're doing emails now because I've bored you to death. We've got to break down these barriers, and we've got to do it now. And just as I finish, there's a couple of slides I wanted to just share with you. We engage in 11 Health with a chief patient officer. She's a patient, she's a psychologist as well, and she basically holds our feet to the fire. But as we look around healthcare in general, and we look at chief medical officers, chief nursing officers, CIOs, CEOs, everybody on these boards of trusts, and companies and institutions, there's never a chief patient officer. And I wonder why. And I think it's not good enough to say we're all patients and we've got to be patient-centric. I think it starts at the very top. And I would ask, why is there no chief patient officer in every single company or entity that is connected to healthcare or is trying to deliver healthcare? Not as a token and not as somebody to tick a box on, but purely as somebody who will engage in the conversation the same way as everybody else. This is not about putting me ahead of anybody. I'm not interested in being the centre of everyone's world. I just want to have a seat at the table with everybody. I want to be with you. I want to partner with you. And I think as patients, sometimes we do ourselves a disservice, perhaps with how we interact. Perhaps it always defaults back to our story and our situation. And actually it is important that we get coffee at the right time, or we press this or we do that. But if we want to make change, we have to engage, and we have to come forward and engage in the right way as well. So I would just ask you to think about that as you take things back to your own companies. The actual reason why Mike Moritz invested in 11 Health was because he said you truly understood the end user need. More than anything, you understood what the problem was you were solving. And at Stanford, they tell me they get over 30 tech companies coming to them every single month. 29 of them have built the coolest tech, and then they're looking at Stanford to go and infuse that in the system. But you only truly understand the end user need if you live that end user need. And why is it that Tesla or Amazon or all the other tech companies start with end users and build end users, but in healthcare we deliver to the end user? We deliver solutions that we expect the end user to pick up. I think we've got that backwards, and I think if we want to deliver some change, we need to start listening to some of the companies that are the best at engaging with us in the world today and learn from that. There's a brilliant book out there by Matthew Said called Black Box Thinking. Some of you may or may not have read it, and it's really about how the airline industry learns from fatalities and learns from accidents and doesn't sack or admonish people after they make a mistake. They learn from it, and then they come back, and the industry is probably the safest now it's ever been after a period of time where it had some terrible adversities. We can debate the political landscape in healthcare all we want, but I would argue that we have to learn from outside the industry to make our industry better. And to do that, once again, we have to be brave. Thank you very much for your time today.